quite important that we communicate innovation better, and so we get better acceptance of some of the really novel technologies that we're moving forward into society. The title that I was given was Communication as a Tactic of Risk Management. Perhaps an alternative title could be this one here, Innovation and the Role of Risk Communication. It's a bit neutral. Perhaps another title could be Protecting Your Technology Agenda, which gets a bit closer to home. A bit more edgy title might have been this one, How Not to Screw Up Like We Did with GMOs. We really made some big screw-ups with GMOs, and we should learn from that and use those learnings to address how we move novel technologies forward, particularly novel agricultural technologies and novel food technologies. We think of this movement from the invention to the innovation phase as management of risk. Whether we start at the research pipeline, in perhaps an academic organization or in your company, we go through stage gating, we take it into product development, go through regulatory approvals, because there's a pretty good chance we're going to have to go through regulatory approvals. We get to the marketing stage, and then we grow the market and ensure good product stewardship. Now, all the way through that pipeline, we're looking at managing risk. It might be technology risk, ensuring that we've got freedom to operate. It might be, technical risk, trying to upgrade the idea into something that's actually workable during the product development phase. We've got to manage regulatory risk. And then we also have to manage what we call market risk. Now, I'm not talking about the market, the financial market risk. It's the risk that we encounter from trying to sell our product into the consumer, the ultimate consumer. And while we're pretty good at handling the technology risk and regulatory risk, we're not very good at best market risk, negotiating this market risk. We haven't been very good at it particularly in the GMO space. We fail to recognize what the feelings and what the values of the ultimate consumer really are. As a consequence of that, we have not got acceptance of our innovation, or do not get acceptance of our innovations. So we really need to think about how we communicate with the general stakeholder, the lay public, how we communicate them and do a better job. Because if we don't, all the ideas that come from great research like we've heard about at this meeting will not go to market if they generate perceptions of risk or concern or controversy in that ultimate market. Now, communicating with the public about technology is not that simple, because we work in this challenging environment. We work in what's called a risk society these days. Ulrich Beck came up with this term, I think, in the 70s, and he talked about this risk society where we see the socialization of risk. The people on the street they perceive they're taking a risk, whereas the benefit is privatized. The benefits actually go into the pockets of the companies. We also face this problem of the instantaneous and constant communications in this digital age which we have. The public are increasingly aware of risks, and as well as the publicity around them. We also have to deal with this phenomenon which is related, called social amplification of risk. Because of social media and the regular media, the whole risk thing is amplified. And we have to cope with that, because this media obsession with risk and fear stories has increased what we call social dialogue about risk. If you do a search on particular subjects on Google, you can bet your bottom dollar that a lot of the times, most of the top searches are dealing with negative stories about a particular issue. And in addition to all these problems, we also have got what we call the crisis of trust. Since 2008, there's a major crisis of trust, particularly in the financial sector, but in big business in general. And we have to cope with that when we're communicating with the public. We think of communicating about science and innovation in three ways. We can do public relations, we can do science communications, and we do risk communications. Now, all of these types of communication have a specific role, but they also have a specific time and place when they can be used. If you think you can use public relations or science communications when there are perceptions of risk around a particular issue, then I'm afraid you'd be wrong. Because in fact, what they do is they enhance the level of risk perception and actually make matters worse. And we've actually used those tools in the communication around genetically modified foods. And they haven't, as you can probably gather, have not been particularly successful. Risk communication itself, well, it's a science-based approach for communicating effectively in high concern, low trust, sensitive or controversial situations. Perhaps a better up-to-date description of risk-on would be that it is an interactive process that places emphasis on dialogue, conflict resolution, consensus building, and relationship development among parties involved with or affected by the risk. Through this definition, we're trying to get a better realization that we need to communicate both ways, we need to listen, we need to interact. And there are what we call three paradigms of risk communication. On the x-axis, we've got increasing hazard. On the y-axis, we've got increasing concern. And when you've got high hazard, but relatively low concern, we talk about the need for what's called precautionary advocacy. And in precautionary advocacy, we're trying to raise awareness of an issue without scaring the bejeebers out of people. We want people to put on their protective equipment. We want people to get vaccinated. Outrage management, on the other hand, is when there's a relatively low hazard, or a hazard that is an inherent hazard, or low hazard because of effective regulation, but there are high levels of concern. And then when there's high hazard and high concern, we've got a full-blown crisis. Now, from an animal science or an animal industry point of view, you can perhaps put some of these things into those particular types of communication. Precautionary advocacy, maybe safe handling of meat. You can come up with some other ones. But outrage management, natural versus industrial, is a major challenge for a lot of the food industry. We can talk about pink slime, we can talk about GMOs, we can talk about live animal shipment. That's a real big one in Australia with the problems of shipping animals to Indonesia from northern territories, also to Vietnam now. There's some major issues there. And in a full-blown crisis, we can perhaps talk about foodborne disease outbreaks or BSE. So there's various paradigms of risk communication, but we need to think and apply science to the communication in these particular situations. He gets two things wrong. One, it's not all about the facts, and the public aren't irrational. Let me explain. He has what we call deficit model thinking, and he believes that filling a knowledge gap with technical facts on risks will lead to acceptance. Now, this kind of approach has consumed millions and millions of dollars and has done nothing more than increase the level of concerns about the issues. It doesn't work. We knew that it didn't work, but it's still the go-to model of communication around GMOs. Phil, tell them about the facts. Tell them about the facts. It doesn't work. And just recently we had the Bayer CEO tell us we have to educate the public more. The public don't want to be educated. They're not interested in the facts. Awareness does not bring about acceptance. And they're not interested in the facts because of this rule here. Research indicates that facts about risk appear to play little or no role in determining public perception concerns about risks. The facts only contribute about 5% towards influencing how risk is perceived by audiences. The other 95% in any risk dialogue concerns the social, moral, and personal aspects of risk. Now, why is this? Well, to risk assessors and to scientists, risk equals hazard or the probability of a negative event will take place. But the public think of risk equaling hazard, but probably they don't take into account the probability side of that. But they also factor in what we call outrage. And outrage is a very, very powerful force, and it outweighs hazard. In general, in the public, low outrage is okay, it's safe. High outrage means it's risky. The key ones are these: trust, benefit, fairness, and control. TBFC. Trust, benefit, fairness, and control. If any of those are lacking in your audience or the people that you're asking to take on board a risk around your innovation or your idea, then they will not take on board that risk. And of those four, the most important is trust. Without trust, we will not win any debate around risk. Now, this outrage is a very powerful force. It's universal. Whether you're in India or Chile or Canada or Europe, it's universal. and it overrides hazard in risk perception in all cultures. Audiences resist data. They hang on to risk perception unless their outrage or concern is addressed. You know, even if you talk to your blue in the face about the facts around the hazard, which dispels any argument that they may have, their outrage may increase because you're not addressing their real concerns. What we need to do is go beyond the deficit model because people consume technical data and process information entirely different to so-called experts. We have to understand their risk perceptions, and what they value is critical. And if we try to make them more knowledgeable about the technical facts, this will only stir outrage. A bit about decision science and cultural cognition. Prior to Kahneman's work, social scientists believed that people are generally rational and their thinking is normally sound. But emotions such as fear, affection, and hatred explain most of the occasions on which people depart from rationality. Then Kahneman came along with Amos Tversky. Daniel Kahneman did a lot of his early work at UBC, and he published this paper called Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristics and Biases. What he showed was that it challenged the rational-irrational approaches by documenting systematic errors in the thinking of normal people. That's the lay public and you as well. You think exactly the same as the lay public. You're as rational or irrational as the lay public. You think the same as them because your cognitive process is the same. So what Kahneman did, he found that these errors were traced to the design of the machinery of cognition, our brain, how our brain works, rather than the corruption of thought by emotion. And he talked about heuristics, which are substitutions or mental shortcuts. And there are a number of heuristics, and a couple of them are the availability heuristic and the effect heuristic. The availability heuristic means that we tend to do a mental shortcut because the things that we hear about most are uppermost in our mind, and we think of those immediately, which makes us kind of lazy. We've heard a lot about this issue, so we'll take on board that opinion because we've heard a lot about it. And if it's a negative thing, particularly around GMO, we will take on board the availability of that information, go, oh, we don't like it because we hear about it all the time. But that's the availability heuristic taking over because it means that we don't have to think about the actual subject in that great detail. We're lazy. The effect heuristic, on the other hand, is another substitution where it connects me with my emotions. Do I like it? How do I feel? If I feel good about it, it will make my decisions easier and I won't have to think about it. And we have to cope with these effects or these heuristics when we're doing the communication process. The other thing I could talk about is cultural cognition. The cultural cognition of risk refers to the tendency of individuals to form risk perceptions that are congenial to their values. In practical terms, cultural cognition informs us that people endorse whatever position reinforces their connection to others with whom they share important commitments. And that's work from Dan Kahan at Yale Law School. And he's done a lot of work on positions that people have that are associated with their politics. You can predict what a Democratic voter will feel about a particular issue very, very closely. And the issue can be as diverse as climate change to contraception or whatever. It's all very, very predictable. But at least emphasizes the fact that society has different viewpoints and there are different groups of people with different values. On the bottom left-hand side there, you've got the entrepreneurial risk subgroup. And I'm pretty sure that most of the people in this room will perhaps belong to that group. And they see that risks offer opportunities and should be accepted in exchange for benefits. On the other hand, an egalitarian risk subgroup might think that risks should be avoided unless they are inevitable to protect the public good. And then you've got three other groups, the atomized individuals who think, well, hey, life's a lottery, risks are out of our control, safety's a matter of luck, man, no problem. Well, hey. Bureaucrats, risks are acceptable as long as institutions have the routines to control them. And then the hermits, risks are acceptable as long as they do not involve coercion of others. So this is just an idea that the population out there is different. They think different to us. And what it also indicates to us that we need to think about how we communicate with these different subgroups. And what it also indicates is it's going to be very difficult to communicate with these different subgroups because we don't share the same values. If you have a communicator from the entrepreneurial subgroup who goes to talk to egalitarians, he hasn't got a cat's chance in hell of actually achieving anything because he doesn't have the shared values of that particular group. So we need to think about how we communicate with these groups and how we use third parties. If industry uses a third-party academic to go and talk to these groups, they're not going to work unless there is some commonality in their values. The challenges that we face because of the way people work and they think about risk are major, but we need to think about how we overcome those challenges. How do we take some of this research or all of this research and put it to work in communicating about risk and proactively thinking about how we might communicate with people who perceive risks about our novel technology or our innovation once we get to that market phase. An essential component of managing risk is what we call the APP strategy: anticipate, prepare, and practice. And it's absolutely essential, and you have to do it early. You can't do it just before you come to market. You really should be thinking about the risk that you may face as you're developing your product at a very early stage. You can identify your high-stress issues and topics. You can identify the key stakeholders and their relative importance. You can anticipate the questions and concerns that they may face. Giuliani anticipated the 77 questions that you're most likely to get asked in a crisis scenario, and he learned a response for all 77 questions. That's preparation, and that's the kind of preparation we can do if we're going to mitigate risk perceptions in our ultimate customer. We need to create the right messages. We need to have credible people to deliver the messages. Not everybody can get in front of people and talk to them about risks. We also need to identify the kind of channels of communication we use. Are we going to use online, traditional media, or are we going to use public meetings? We think about the number of messages. You've really got only a chance to deliver 3 messages. There's a rule of thumb, the rule of 3, 27 words, 9 seconds, and 3 messages. That's why you've got to do some preparation. Getting those 3 messages across, if you're lucky, in 9 seconds is not that easy. How you deliver the message, you take on board the primacy recency theory, and you think, people only remember the thing if they're under stress, they only remember the first thing they hear and the last thing they hear. The bit in the middle, yeah, you can forget it. We need to establish trust. We need to overcome the mental noise. All our machinery works the same, but when we are stressed, we do not process information as effectively. We focus, the mental noise that we have in our head means that we don't hear effectively. It means that we focus on the negative. We have to avoid negative language. We can think about sentence construction, the appearance of the messenger. He's got his hands in his pockets. We're talking about non-verbal messaging. Non-verbal messaging is very, very important. It can make up about 80% of your communication. I've mentioned trust a number of times through the talk, and that is very, very important. Not just at a personal level, but it's very important from an organizational level. And if your organization doesn't have trust in the population, well, you're not going to be very successful. So lots of things to think about, both internally and externally, because without, actually the top of that slide is missing, without trust, risk communication is futile. Trust is absolutely vital. Just some of the things that we do wrong when communicating about risk. We tend to focus too much on the benefits, and if we focus too much on the benefits, we start to sound like a used car salesman. We also fail to disclose risks. If an industry is regulated, there must be risks. But let's be honest with the stakeholders. There are risks, and this is what we do to address them. We focus far too much on the technical and elements of risk analysis. In the past, we've focused on a linear educational type of delivery rather than engagement and a conversation. We're not targeting audiences by the response to risk. We tend to reframe values and beliefs and issues to technical issues, trying to convert the debate to something that we're comfortable about, facts, deficit model. We fail to acknowledge uncertainties, and we often use expert voices who actually make things worse by widening the lay versus expert views on risk. In conclusion, we need to ensure that your innovation agenda is not compromised by losing sight of the market and the values, not the value, the values of your stakeholders. And really think risk communication early in the innovation process and prepare for all eventualities.